Okay, abusia be makwa ba sonko so edeba POG Media so abusia yembonra yensemu John Dramani Mahama SP di nani abra abusia enye asam keto akra sisi ano wama Chief Justice Torkornoo Chief Justice Torkornoo wama no 10 days say on fan responded to sa 3 petition na say omode abra na abusia baby asam no ekeka kono abusuya Chief Justice Torkornoo no oje ne ho baabia enye John Dramani Mahama nani abre a echese wama ne 10 days ultimatum se sa 10 days no wante ne nka de ebeto no abusuya baabia asem ne keka kono mom yanko na yanko nkuti ensem e course na answer na ebeko no ensem kan bi afa share comment section like share ma afoforo so ensa into me enka bi aha POG Media so political trending stories are make waves no yenso. I
just gone by is Ghana Brief. Now, coming up. The clock is now ticking for the Chief Justice after the President provided her with petitions seeking her removal. More of that right now. President John Dramani Mahama has responded to Chief Justice Torkornoo's request for copies of petitions seeking her removal. Tonight, the President releasing 3 separate petitions from 3 individuals who want the CJ out, but not before expressing his disappointment for the social media frenzy that preceded his receipt of the CJ's request, accusing the CJ of circulating the letter before he, the President, could, and I quote, review its content. Now, the President says because of that leak, it is now constrained to mark the document and again, quoting, as restricted. The President also in the letter indicates he is a step ahead of the CJ. Now, this is why. He indicates that he had sought consent of the Council of State to share copies of the petitions with the Chief Justice at least 48 hours before her letter asking for them. Now, in a rather generous response, the President gives the CJ 10 days to send in her comments instead of the 7 days she had originally requested. Now, she had earlier argued that both the petitions and her response were necessary for consultations under Article 1466 before any committee of inquiry is set up, and that she will be given, and indeed, in the President's response, he says that the CJ will be given full and fair opportunity to be heard, unquote. A practitioner joining us for a bit more on this story. I appreciate you talking to us, Counsel. But we've seen the President's response, and again, I've narrated bits and pieces of it for the purpose of our viewers who haven't come across it yet. What are your readings into his response to the CJ?
I think the entire issues surrounding the petition together with the Chief Justice letter and the response from the President could have been handled much better than currently unraveling. You could clearly see the displeasure in the authored letter of the presidency. I thought that perhaps even if the Chief Justice's office, the Chief Justice herself, aired the President knowing who he is. I know the President probably didn't even see the letter, but I think the letter could have addressed the issues without showing the level of sentiment that it did demonstrate. First of all, because the President's office is the highest office. The Chief Justice, of course, we are not dealing with a small office, but clearly the Chief Justice's letter was a bit rushed and quite emotional, because there's no way the President could have made any determination of a prima facie case against the Chief Justice without eliciting a response from the Chief Justice. And so it is on the basis of this that I say that the whole scenario could have been handled better. Let's not forget that the president, and indeed the presidency, has an obligation to inform us of happenings on every issue. It is in accord with the principles of transparency and indeed the good governance that once the president had received these petitions, it informed the people of Ghana that this is what is going on. And so I do not think that president's initial position was wrong in any way at all. If you read the letter authored by, or at least signed by Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, I think it was quite terse and straightforward that there has been petitions received and it's receiving attention. And that for me was apt because it didn't disclose the content of the petitions. It didn't talk about who the petitioners are. It didn't disclose anything beyond the fact that these petitions had been received. That is in accord with good governance and good conscience and indeed the rule of law, that we be informed of happenings in government. That's the only way we can hold our leaders accountable and indeed also participate in the democratic governance. And so, but one could clearly see that it appears from the reactions of the Chief Justice that it came along with a bit of emotions, as if the request that wouldn't have happened, that the decision would have been taken with or without that request. I do not think that that would have been correct because there's no way a prima facie case will be handled without any response from the CJ, whether now or even in the future when she's requested to respond to the petition. So, it is on the basis of these that I think that as sensitive as the issues are, it could have been handled better. Now it has even turned political. We are now dealing with NDC against MPP, when in actual fact this should have been a purely legal issue.
I see. So which are you referring to as a motive? The Chief Justice's response or the President's letter in response to the Chief Justice?
First of all, as I've said, the President's reaction, the Chief Justice's letter was needless because that point would have come to that point in the life of the petition for her removal would have come there anyway. So it was quite needless. And that's why I say that one could clearly see that there was a bit of rush and emotions towards, with that letter. And hoping that the response from the presidency would have been relatively better. It also came with that same level of reaction, which shouldn't have been the case, particularly because it's coming from the office of the president. I think it could have easily addressed the issues without clear demonstrations of the emotional connection and then there's a resentment that it addressed the letters from the Chief Justice. So it's more like reacting to the same level of emotion from the Chief Justice, which for me was not helpful in diplomatic circles. That letter could have been appropriately address the same issues without necessarily having to.
I see. Counsel,
be emotive.
Indeed. Very well. Counsel, when you look side by side, the president's response and the declarations being sought with the suit at the Supreme Court, what do you think happens next, particularly to the suit?
Well, the suit does not in any way stop the process from going on until there's a positive pronouncement from the judiciary, from the court, ordering a stay of proceedings. Until that is done, even though we can understand that typically, at least as we witnessed under the earlier administration, once the suit is mounted, an unwilling president would tell you that, he would want to wait until the outcome of the suit before any further decision is taken. But that in itself may not necessarily be the law as we know it to be until the court positively stays any proceedings on the issue going forward. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the need for it. But of course, having said that, it does not also mean that when there's a suit, you act in a way that would jeopardize the possible outcome of that suit. And so there's a balancing act where you try to, the process would probably go on such that it does not jeopardize the action in court.
I see. But there are those who argue that by the president's action of providing the Chief Justice with the 3 petitions against her, the suit at the Supreme Court becomes moot. Where do you sit on that?
That, for me, is difficult to state at this moment, considering that there are a number of reliefs that are being sought. And so some of the reliefs may be quite right to put it the way you do. But I think that it is better to play the wait-and-see attitude, considering the multiplicity of the reliefs being
right.
sought.
And then you mentioned earlier how it would appear that the situation is becoming the NPP against the NDC. How helpful is this to the situation in setting precedents, really?
So this is exactly why I am displeased with the entire in a political term rather than being seen purely from the legal angle. As you rightly pointed out, there are currently about 2 or 3 different suits that have been filed, all of which are engineered by politically exposed persons, and the lawyers involved are politically known within the circles that they belong to. And so it tends to send a particular narrative out there. And even the discussions out there, you clearly can gauge either lawyers or leaders of each of the political parties' position based on the action that is going on. And so, and when you're able to predict the positions of each side as against the issues going on, it doesn't help. It doesn't help with in addressing the issues from a purely legalistic perspective, and because then everything becomes a political interpretation or rather than legal interpretation, and it muddies the waters, and it does not really help to come out with some if you like sustainable interpretations that can help guide all of us in future. Should anything of this nature.
Right. The president in his letter also makes reference to Article 146, where he really talks about confidentiality, not only to the person involved, but also to the documents and relevant materials pertaining to the petition or the case, so to speak. Is there justification for that?
Indeed, that is correct. That is correct. That's a correct position. And this is because, as I said earlier, this is a very sensitive issue. Whoever the petitioners are, will naturally have to be protected from being attacked unfairly by people who may want to do mischief. And so it is the reason why the law, as pronounced by the Supreme Court, says that the entire process, at least leading to the removal, has to be handled with this level of discretion to avoid anybody being unfairly attacked and all of that. And also it helps by not dividing the country, because once these matters come into the public domain, there's a level of information that has to come in within the public circles. And so if you bring everything within the space, the public space, you may end up polarizing the discussions, and particularly because we already polarized politically. And so it is helpful that matters are handled with the level of discretion that it requires, so that by the time the outcome is known, would have at least been certain that that possible outcome was in accordance with the law and practices of this country. Because really, let's all remember that it is the tribunal that is set up comes from some of them are justices. In fact, 2 of them are supposed to be justices of the Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice is entitled to a lawyer, and so the process is quite transparent. If you look at least the tenets of the law, it's very transparent process. And so, and I'm sure in future, when the outcome is already known, those who may be willing to apply for the proceedings would have the right to have them, and they'll be giving copies of the proceedings. But until then, it is always safer to protect the entire process from the level of antagonism and mischief that may come along with. And so it is indeed, for me, a good thing that it is handled with the level of discretion that we are seeing. But unfortunately now, some of the things are already in the public domain. But I think attempts would have to be made to continuously protect the process from abuse. Let's remember that last year under President Addo, we had similar petitions against the CJ. I think it was by Professor Sari or so. And it was shut down by the president on some grounds. And part of those grounds were the fact that Professor Sari, after having waited for so long, wasn't hearing from the president and decided to bring the matters into the public domain. And that was part of the reasons that was used by the then president to shoot it down. And so with this as a learning curve, I think we should learn to appreciate that going forward, we would have to handle things better to avoid the level of mischief that may be associated with it.
Indeed, Counsel, we'll leave our conversation here. Thank you so much for talking to us. Justice Abdullah is legal practitioner. Now, we had arranged to speak to Minister of State in charge of government communications, Felix Kwakye-Ofosu. Unfortunately, we are unable to connect at this time. But let's roll it back again and see aspects or excerpts of that letter the president wrote in the last few hours of the day. It goes on to say that through the secretary to the president, Dr. Callistus Mahama, His Excellency has received 3 petitions requesting your removal as Chief Justice. 2 are dated 14th February 2025 and the 3rd 17th March 2025. Now, on the 24th of March, 7 days after the last 7 days after the last one was received, the president wrote to the chairman of the Council of State forwarding the petitions. Now, I want you to take note of that because I told you that based on the president's full letter, he says, look, I was a step ahead of the CJ. If she's only been patient, we would have got to that point anyway. Because on the 24th of March, the president, through his secretary, makes us know that he wrote to the chairman of the Council of State, Addo, that he wanted the petitions forwarded to the Chief Justice for initial or preliminary comments on it. Then, that letter that received in the last few hours of the day also goes on to say that the confidentiality attached to Article 146 proceedings extends to all documents and materials. Finally, you will be afforded a full and fair opportunity to be heard, and you're requested to submit your preliminary response within 10 days of receipt of this letter. Now, if you didn't get why, I'd indicated that this was a generous response from the president. In the Chief Justice's original letter to the president, she had requested 7 days within which to respond. Now, the president says, look, you can have 10 days to respond to this letter. We are not in a hurry. That is what the president's letter seems to communicate. But then also it talks about how disappointed the president is that he didn't have a chance to review that letter before the social media or media frenzy around this. Now, I can't go into the mathematics of that, but that is what the president has said. Unfortunately, we still cannot connect with the Minister of State in charge of government communications, Felix Kwakye-Ofosu. We would rather move on to some other issues. If we are able to connect, we'll bring back this story. In the meantime, a road crash involving
Okay, abusuya wene ensema ekoso ewo political highway so John Dramani Mahama ene ama HSA Chief Justice Torkornoo 10 days ultimatum na ho ensem ene yerebre mo yebada masesamo je pene ko tiza audio we edemai aha POG Media so medamase